I would like to warmly welcome everybody to the event after the crimes of Hamas on October 2nd. So, after the crimes of Hamas on October 7th, 2023, the responses of democratic civil society in Israel. I would like to thank our panel guests, Shira Ben-Sasson-Fürstenberg and Yasmin Abu Freiha, for sharing their assessments and thoughts on the consequences of the Hamas crimes with us. Thank you very much. I would also like to thank the New Israel Fund. Without the initiative and commitment of Maya Soirev, sitting here, this event would not have come about. And the Heinrich Böll Foundations in Baden-Württemberg, Bremen, Hamburg, Lower Saxony, North Rhine-Westphalia, Rhineland-Palatinate, Saxony, Schleswig-Holstein, and the Peter Kelly the Foundation in Bavaria has also contributed to the success and the numerous participants from all over Germany via live stream. Thank you very much. Our topic today is connected with a lot of suffering, pain, and injuries from different sides. We want to create a space of exchange, listening, and respectful interaction. A space in which we may have to endure hearing perspectives that do not correspond to our own. A space that is supported by the effort to see hurt and pain of others. My name is Inga Börjesson. I'm Managing Director of the Bildungswerk Berlin. I don't want to say much more now, but I would like to give you some organizational and technical informations. We have only recently moved into these rooms and have not yet managed to install our audio system. We therefore have to make to do with a makeshift solution. We only have one microphone available for the podium, and we only have one speaker here in the room. This means that we should avoid any background noise as far as possible, for example, like whispering or unnecessary moving of chairs, etc. Later, when questions are asked by the audience, they must be spoken very loudly and clearly and may have to be repeated from the podium so that everything can be understood in the live stream. I apologize for these technical shortcomings and hope for your understanding. So now I would like to hand over to Maya Soirev, who will be moderating the discussion this evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much and good evening. Thank you all for coming. My name is Maya Soirev. I'm the Executive Director of the New Israel Fund, NIF, in Germany. I also want to start by acknowledging how incredibly traumatic and painful these past 5 weeks have been for a lot of people, and I assume including people in this room or in front of the screens. The horrific terror attacks committed by Hamas on the 7th of October, the level of cruelty with which they were committed, and the kidnapping of more than 200 people from Israel has deeply traumatized Israeli society. Since 7th of October, there has been too much suffering, too much pain, too many civilian lives lost, both Israeli and Palestinian, and too many families mourning or worrying about their loved ones. This is the backdrop against which this conversation is taking place, and I would like all of us to keep this in mind. At a time like this, when one might feel like there's no hope, there's only hate, there's no humanity, and so on, we really wanted to give this stage to our Jewish and Palestinian colleagues from Israel to share their perspectives and talk about the impressive and important work civil society in Israel has been doing in these past 5 weeks. We felt that these voices have not been heard enough and that they might add a more complex and more human perspective on this conflict and what has been going on. So thank you again also from our side to our fantastic speakers, Shira Ben-Sasson-Fürstenberg, who's with me in Berlin tonight, and Dr. Yasmin Abu Freiha, who's joining us from Beersheba, in Israel and who's calling in from there. Thank you for finding the time to speak to us, especially in these very busy days, as everyone can imagine. Thank you to our cooperation partner, to the Bildungswerk Berlin, der Heinrich-Böll-Stiftung, and specifically to Inga Börjesson and her team here for hosting us tonight, for taking care of the technology and everything else, and for making this very timely and important conversation possible. And thank you also to the other branches of Bildungswerk that have been mentioned and who are live streaming this conversation all over Germany. Before we turn to tonight's subject, I want to say just 2 sentences about NIF, because not all of you might be familiar with the New Israel Fund. The New Israel Fund is the biggest supporter of civil society in Israel, and in that position has been supporting civil society in their struggles for democracy, pluralism, equality, and human rights. And we will hear more about the work of NIF, especially since October the 7th. In Germany, NIF was founded in 2014 and has been supporting the work in Israel. This includes fundraising, but also regular events like this one. So if you want to learn more about the organization or stay up to date, please do visit our website or sign up for our newsletter. I've left some sheets for signing up outside the room, or those of you in front of the screens can go to our website, nif-deutschland.de. As for tonight's event, I will start by asking a couple of questions and by giving the speakers the opportunity to tell us a bit more about the situation right now in Israel and to present the work of their organizations. Then we will leave at least half an hour in the end for questions from the floor. So please keep your questions to the end. Right, that's it for housekeeping. Now, let me start by introducing the speakers. Shira Ben-Sasson-Fürstenberg is the Associate Director at New Israel Fund Israel and Director of NIF's International Relations and Development Department. She has a BA in Sociology and an MA in Anthropology from Hebrew University in Jerusalem. Prior to her long-standing work for NIF, Shira worked at the Knesset Research and Information Center and served as the director of IREP, Israel Religious Expression Platform, at the Jewish Federations of North America. Her quest for greater rights for women within Jewish orthodoxy
Is a little bit more
slower.
The translation.
Sure. Oh yeah, we have some translation in the room also. So Shira's quest for greater rights for women within Jewish orthodoxy led her to direct the conservative movement's Jewish Pluralism Watch. Before taking on her current role at NIF, Shira worked as a grants and program officer at NIF in Shittil and focused on the issues of Jewish pluralism and religious freedom in particular. She's also one of the founding members of the new movement Leftists of Faith, which seeks to bring together Jewish Israelis from across the political spectrum who are committed to democracy, pluralism, and equality. Thank you so much for being here. Dr. Yasmin Abu Freiha, joining us from Beersheba, is Health Policy Director at the Task Force for Health Promotion in the Arab Society in Israel at the Israeli Ministry of Health. She's a doctor and Executive Director of Genesis, an NGO she founded that aims to prevent genetic diseases in the Middle East, especially in the Bedouin community, by spearheading premarital genetic testing and matching. She also serves on the board of directors of Project Wadi Atir and co-chairs the alumni program of Our Generation Speaks Fellowship. She has won several awards, including the 2007 Ramon Award for Quality, Leadership, and Excellence, as well as the 2015 Travel Grant for Outstanding Young Investigators at the 38th European Cystic Fibrosis Society Conference. She's also a board member of NIF. Yasmin holds a BSc in Medical Science and an MD from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, and she's calling us from Beersheba. Thank you so much for joining. Okay, so I want to start by asking you both what the situation is like right now in Israel, where you are both working. What is the situation? How has it developed after the 7th of October? Can you say something about the situation of displaced families, survivors of terror, and the families of the hostages? And also, this means since you are working both as a doctor and civil society activist in the south of Israel, particularly with the Bedouin community, can you also talk about the situation of these communities a little bit more, as well as the ongoing rocket attacks and what the particular challenges are at the moment? Who wants to start? Do you want to start, Chia?
No, I can start. Every time I turn to Yasmin, I don't see her, but thank you for having us. It's an honor to be here in your new home, and an honor to spend some time together discussing things that are very important and close to our heart. And I want to thank you for taking this evening and coming to share in this conversation in hard times and in a complex conversation. My name is Shira. You heard my bio. I have been with the New Israel Fund for quite a long time now, and later maybe we can talk a little bit more about what the New Israel Fund is. But just in a nutshell, to get a spirit of what's happening in Israel, I left there on Thursday and I'm going back tomorrow. So my account is rather fresh. If you've been following the news and if you have friends or family in Israel, you know what it's like, of course. But as I said, in a nutshell, the war, the attack on Saturday, October 7th, which was also a Jewish holiday, end of our month of the high holidays, took everyone by huge, terrible surprise. And I would say that for the first 8 to 10 hours of the attack, there was zero response by any official entity of Israel, including the army. The Israeli army took a long time, a few hours for the Israeli army to start and many were, of course, directly attacked. Those first few hours will take a very heavy toll looking forward on feeling of safety and trust in Israel, and maybe we'll get back to that. So it was a terrible day in practicality, in the actual reality, but also in the meaning of being taken by surprise exactly 50 years to the day after the Yom Kippur War in 1973, which was and still is a great trauma for Israeli society. What the attack brought on was, apart from a surprise and killing and kidnapping 240 people into the Gaza Strip, is also, at this point, 5 weeks later, hundreds of thousands of Israelis are evacuated from their homes. People cannot live, and the state of Israel demands that not stay in their homes if it's too close to the border, both in the south of Israel, near the Gaza Strip where the attack happened, but also in the north of Israel, where the area is constantly on a small fire, heating up day in, day out, sort of a dance that is happening on the northern border of Israel. So it brings us to a situation where hundreds of thousands of Israelis are living in a hotel room all over the country with their children and their dogs, and some of them after suffering severe trauma and losing family members. If you know the Jewish custom of the Shiva, of the 7 days that we sit after a person has been buried, many hundreds of people have been running a Shiva, a 7-day mourning in a hotel room, because that's where they are now after losing close family members on that day. So many are evacuated from their homes. Many were asked to stay and feel unsafe in their homes, whether it is because they are too close to the border, or because rockets are still flying every day, or because they don't have a shelter, a bomb shelter in their house or in their building. So it's a very shaken situation in Israeli society. And of course, many, many, many hundreds of thousands more are recruited to the army, both people who are on service right now and people who have been recruited to our reserves duty. So it's a very unstable time for Israeli society. And I will end my description of what is happening by saying two things. One is that the government, the Israeli government, and it's very embarrassing for me to sit outside my country and to say these things about my country, but the Israeli government has been extremely dysfunctional, not just in the first few hours, but in the first few weeks, and including up until now, in responding to the needs of our citizens. And of course, or not of course, we can see differences in the way the government responds to the needs of different communities, and Yasmin can speak to that soon, but by and large, we are looking at vacuum, a huge hole in the response of what, in the level of what we were expecting, in the level of what we were thinking about Israel's ability to respond to crisis, to the point that a government official is calling the New Israel Fund grants officer and saying, could you pay for hotel rooms now today? Because I have a family that is about to be kicked out of the hotel and I can't bring funding from the government entity that I work for. Is it possible for your philanthropy? We are a philanthropy, not liked by the New Israel government and persecuted by the New Israel by the Israeli government. Is it possible for the New Israel Fund to pay for a few more nights for this family in the hotel? So this is just a small example that goes to show the lack of organization and the problem with the government response to the crisis. And the other thing I want to say is that the issue of the hostages is continues to bleed within the heart of Israeli society, and the controversy over what the response should be and how we should be acting, and are we doing everything possible to bring them home? Can I be certain that my leaders are doing everything in their power to bring them home? Continues to be a very, very, as I said, bleeding and scary questions, because the ages and the variety of the people who have been kidnapped start from 9 months to 87 years old, because they are of 30 nationalities, because they are of, I think, 4 or 5 religions. So we have a set of 240 people, a mix of 240 people whose families cannot live in the same world that we're living, and who can't be for sure certain that everything is or they only need to hope that everything is being done to bring them home. And Yasmin, can I ask you to show my first picture, please? Thank you. We are a do-it-yourself partnership. When I left, which one is the shared screen? The green one, yes. Yeah, thank you. So when I left to come here less than a week ago, if you've ever been to the Ben Gurion airport in Israel, you know that when you walk down after you've passed the security, there is a wall with pictures, and you can see orange trees and like historical Israeli pictures. And now we have no art showing, only the pictures of the people who have been kidnapped. And when I was coming here, I stopped to stand by my 2 friends who have been kidnapped. And I took their picture, and I was saying to myself and to them, I hope you'll be home before I'll come back home. And I'm coming back home tomorrow afternoon. This is Vivian. You may have read about her. Vivian Silver was 74 years old, lived in Kibbutz Be'eri. Just last night, we learned that after 5 weeks, her body has been identified. When I left, I thought she was still alive. Vivian is a peace activist, worked all of her life to bring together Jews and Arabs, especially in the southern region, especially between youth and especially between women, and a person who drove sick people from the border in Gaza into hospitals in Israel, a truly unique soul and a friend to many of us and a former board member at Shatil and the New Israel Fund. And I was constantly hoping that she's still alive and that she's able to share her light with the people who are holding her. And there is a verse in the Jewish Bible, I will say it in Hebrew and then in English. It says, Kamayim apanim lapanim ken lev ha'adam la'adam. And the translation is, as water reflects a face back to a face, so one's heart is reflected back to them by another. And the idea is that, you know, in past times, water was like a mirror. And the water mirrors the face that we see, and a heart can mirror another heart when it's looking directly at it. The way Vivian lived her life is this way, is she was a reflection. She reflected her peace and uniqueness and belief in peace to anyone who met her. And I was constantly hoping that this is how she's conducting herself, also in captivity. But last night, we learned that she died. I will miss her funeral tomorrow, but I will visit with her family next week. That's Vivian. My other hostage is Hirsch Goldberg, Poland. Hirsch is 23 years old. He's a civilian. He was at the party at a music festival that was suffered much of the attack that morning. He and other friends hid in a roadside bomb shelter. His friend Aner, a son of a friend of mine, was throwing back 7 or 8 live hand grenades that were thrown into that shelter, and Aner was able to throw them live 4 seconds outside. One of them wounded Hirsch, and his arm is amputated. We have footage of him being kidnapped and his arm has been cut off. That's the last footage we have. His parents are good friends of mine. He prays in my synagogue. We've been trying to help the family. And if you haven't heard my friend Rachel Goldberg, Hirsch's mother, speak in the United Nations or last night in Washington, D.C., I very much recommend listening to her and to the message that she carries for humanity and not just for her son. And for Hirsch, I'm still praying and believing that he will come back home. So that's a taste of what our everyday life is now in Israel. And we'll hear from Yasmin, because being a Palestinian Israeli is 10 times more complicated than everything I just said.
Thanks so much for sharing, Shira.
Thank you.
And for sharing the personal stories also.
Yasmin, inshallah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're still.
I actually wanted to keep Vivian.
We can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Can you hear me? Oh no, we have a sound problem? Can you hear me? No? I don't think it's from my side though. Can you hear me now? Oh, okay. I just wanted, let's see if I can do it again. I just wanted to talk a little bit about Vivian. and say that she's such an amazing person. And I had the honor to sit on the board with her, on the board of Ajik, which is an NGO, like the largest NGO that deals with the Bedouin community in Israel. And I think her story, in a way, shows us how this terrible and traumatic day of October 7th didn't really end, not for us as Israelis, and obviously not for Palestinians and not for Palestinian citizens of Israel. But we're actually still in this trauma and in this situation because it didn't end, and even 40 days later, we're still discovering more and more dead people and dead friends, and this is heartbreaking. So I'm going to be tomorrow at the funeral, but I wish we could have her with us, because she was such an important light in this community of peace builders and peace activists, and she was definitely a role model for all of us. So if I can, should I continue? And okay, thank you. So I can, I want to tell you a little bit about how it is for me personally, and also for the Arab society within Israel, so the Palestinian society within Israel. I am a physician in Soroka. Soroka is the largest hospital in the southern part of Israel. So, and I worked in the emergency room on the day, on Saturday, October 7th. And what we saw there, I've never seen the way it was that day. Horrific picture of hundreds of people coming running barefoot, coming in their private cars, people who came with trucks and just bringing more and more injured people. And they were young people from the rave, from the music festival. They were kids from the Bedouin communities that were hit by rockets. That day started with thousands of rockets and missiles thrown over the entirety of the Negev, the area where I live, and a lot of Bedouin villages that were hit. Actually, most people don't know that, but even the Israeli media don't know that. But the first people who were hit by the missiles were a specific family in the unrecognized villages, and they lost 6 of their children who came dead to the and when we talk about the police and the first responders, we as Bedouin community, we also lost the commander of the police station in Rahat, which is the biggest Bedouin city. We lost the police commander of Segev Shalom, which is another Bedouin town. Maybe, I don't know how much you know about Bedouins, but Bedouins are Arabs, mostly living in the desert, the southern part of Israel. And we have a lot of conflicts with the government and with the Israeli authorities for decades, and a lot of trust issues. But rockets and missiles, they don't discriminate between Arabs and Jews, and they fall wherever. And what we saw that day was, what I saw that day was that the ER was filled with Arabs, Jews, people from Thailand who are foreign workers who work in the fields in agriculture in the kibbutzim, people from the kibbutzim surrounding Gaza, and they were kids and adults, parents, elderly people, and even tourists who were in the music festival. So it was like we saw everything there. And also, I think that the point of hope for me was to see that even the staff was heterogenic. So we had many of my friends were recruited to be in the army during that time, start planning or preparing for the war. And I felt that this is my recruitment, like being in the hospital. And I have to say that all of the Arab and Palestinian physicians, nurses, and people who have any kind of connection to healthcare was in the ER that day, and felt the obligation to be a part of the response to this traumatic event. But now, as the first day or the first week is behind us in a way, we start seeing how the anger is rising up, and how I agree completely with what Shira just said about the government not being dysfunctional. Not only it's not functioning, we are also paying the prices of its dysfunctional status before the war, and the fact that they created such a divide within the Israeli communities and between Jews and Arabs in Israel, that now we're paying the price for this. So what we see now, and I can tell you as a Palestinian citizen of Israel, first we see a lot of incitement against Palestinians. We see people being arrested for posting things on social media, such as we pray for the kids in Gaza, which is basically freedom of speech and being empathic, but it is being considered now in Israel as promoting Hamas ideology. So almost 200 people were arrested or fired from the workplace. Some mayors declared and actually closed the doors from certain workplaces from Arabs to go in. So and some mayors actually don't let Arabs go in their towns. It's everywhere. It's within ministries, it's in hospitals, it's in municipalities, it's everywhere. And you can add on that the fact that Israelis, because they lost their sense of security, and I feel it myself, like when something this horrific happens in October 7th, where your house is no longer your safe space, and your bomb shelter within your house is no longer your safe space, and you cannot count on the military to come and save you and protect you, obviously you will go and get a personal gun. And this is another thing that we see in Israel now. Everyone is being armed, which is to me is a sign of loss of trust with the formal authorities, and the first people who pay this price are the Palestinian citizens of Israel and the Arab society in Israel, because of the ongoing incitement against Arabs and Palestinians. However, okay, and this is an important point, we do see and we hear about so many heroic stories of Bedouins and Arabs saving the lives of Jews from the kibbutzim, from the music festival, saving lives of children. We have one of the people from the Bedouin villages who were killed is Amir Abu Sabila, who's a 25-year-old man who saved the lives of two young girls, 3 and 6 years old. He saw them, going in a car with their parents, and Hamas-Terrorists shot the parents, and the girls were alone in the car, and he saved their lives, but he got shot while trying. Eventually, he was able to get them to be evacuated, but he died, sadly. And we have tons of stories like this. And to me, it's a point of hope, because as opposed to what we see in formal authorities, and as opposed to what we saw in the past decade of, incitements and trying to divide between Arabs and Jews. Luckily, the Israeli and the Palestinian societies are strong enough to work hand in hand, and we at NIF do it constantly, and we speak about it constantly, and we see it now with the work of civil society in the past 5 weeks since October 7th, that any initiative that happens on the ground by civil society is a shared initiative. We have a situation room in Khura that is funded by NIF and is managed or is led by both Jews and Arabs, so Israelis and Palestinians. And same happens in Rahat, and same happens in Ofakim, which is a Jewish town. And we see all of the initiatives of bringing food and helping the education systems and helping the evacuated people from the kibbutzim is always shared Arabs and Jews. So this is what keeps me hopeful, and I guess in a way keeps my sanity, is that the fact that we are joining forces, and we do not let the evil forces that try to divide us to actually divide us. And maybe I will end by this sentence, is that what I understood on October 7th is that the real division is not between Jews and Arabs, and is not between Israelis and Palestinians. This is a vicious division and a wrong one. And I think the real division is between the people who believe that violence is the answer, and those who don't. And I'm on the other side of the people who believe in peace and in humanism and in liberalism, and that death of a child is the death of a child, and it is horrible, and it doesn't matter if it happens in Israel or in Gaza or in I don't know where. And this is my belief, and I know that in NIF this is what we're doing, and I'm very proud to be a part of it, specifically during this time.
You for a very good overview of some of the initiatives already, and I also saw you nodding on a lot of points that Shira was making. So definitely also a shared analysis about this kind of vacuum that happened after the 7th of October. Maybe Shira, do you want to say a little bit more about, and Yasmin already touched upon like a couple of initiatives that are happening in the ground, but maybe you can give us a better, a bit more systematic overview of what's been happening on the ground, like what exactly, how has civil society responded to this, in what areas has it been working, who's been active? Yeah.
Sure, thank you. So as Yasmin said, the situation that we met in October 7th is actually a tip of an iceberg of over a decade and a half of us under this current administration. We've had a short 1-year change government last year, but in general, by and large, in the last over a decade, we've been having a similar administration that is becoming gradually more and more, the democracy is gradually deteriorating and becoming weaker. And we, democratic citizens of Israel, have become more and more concerned about Israeli democracy. And this war found us after a year of protest. Again, for people who have been following news in Israel or have family or friends or have even visited in the past year, maybe some of you have even, or here, maybe some of you have even taken part in our pro-democracy demonstrations because we were responding to a threat of a judiciary overhaul, a judiciary revolution that was being introduced by this current administration, by Benjamin Netanyahu and his partners, both from his own party and in his governing coalition. And the interesting thing is, or a difficult thing is, that over the past year, people like us who have been very much invested in demonstrating and in talking about the face, what kind of face of Israeli society we're interested in, and what do we want for the Supreme Court, and what do we want for equality and justice in Israel, we have been blamed for being anarchists and anti-Israel and hurting the state of Israel and not being good citizens in everything that we did in the past year, which has not broken us down and given us a lot of strength. And it's been the longest lasting protest movement that Israel has ever seen, and also one of the longest lasting protest movement that the world has ever seen. And we had more energy to continue, and more plans to continue. And the New Israel Fund has been involved in supporting some of this work from the first day that it started. But the point is that the entities that were most organized at this point of October 7th and were most ready for response were exactly these crazy anti-Israel leftists, pro-democratic anarchists, so-called, that had systems in place, that had groups of organizing mega demonstrations every week and protests around the world, and processes to combat this legislation were already had a system of operating, had an apparatus on the ground. And today, still 5 weeks later, the ones who are giving the most support and response are these groups of protesters. I am very close to the one in Jerusalem and very proud of my friends who are operating the response in Jerusalem. And it starts from baby food to, in a crazy way, tactical army equipment. Now, the New Israel Fund does not support with its funds buying of helmets and special glasses and or even socks for soldiers in the Israeli military, which is something we're being asked to donate now. But the civilian camp, the civic Israel, needs toys and books and raincoats and wow, I mean, and everything you can think of that is being donated by the public through the organizing of the protest movement and sent out everywhere in Israel to anybody who needs it. Doesn't matter what they vote. It doesn't matter what they think about the Supreme Court. They're being supported by this protest movement because the protest movement is the one that is organized to respond and is the one that is everywhere in Israel after a year of training in doing work on its own without a government back or against the government's work. And that makes us very, very proud. And we have a tiny little hope that it might also change the way people perceive us pro-democrat, crazy leftists in the future, but I may be naive in expecting that. The New Israel Fund, do you want me to speak to the New Israel Fund responses or later, now or later?
No, I think that would be helpful.
For now?
Yeah, helpful for now. And then maybe, Yasmin, you can also say a little bit more about initiatives in the South specifically. You've already mentioned unrecognized villages, for instance. Maybe that's also something that's important to explain. But yeah, maybe.
So generally speaking, it took us about a week and a half to understand where the New Israel Fund needs to be. Now, the New Israel Fund is not so young. It's not 1 year old. It was founded in 1979. And its purpose was to develop this civil society sector that did not exist in Israel. We had private people, we had the government, but we didn't have non-for-profit social change organizations at the late 70s, early 80s in Israel, and that was our goal. So at this point, we were asking ourselves, what is our unique calling for October 2023? And I will say that there is a huge amount of philanthropy taking place and directed at Israel at this moment. From all over the world, money is pouring in. People are digging deep into their pockets and buying everything I just mentioned and more, and sending it by airplane loads into Israel for the past 5 weeks. We have not seen this level of giving, charity and philanthropy in many, many years in Israel. And the money is also coming from within Israel because there is growing affluency and ability in Israel to support by Israelis for Israelis. And now that everybody's giving and giving wholeheartedly, we asked ourselves, what is the New Israel Fund's added value? Where do we have to give that maybe others are not giving? And the 4 areas that we have defined for our giving are the following. First of all, we're doing something that is very uncharacteristic of the New Israel Fund, and we are giving humanitarian aid. And that is what I mentioned. We are literally paying for dozens of hotel rooms. We are not even transferring the money like a grant. If you're in the philanthropy business, you know that there's a grant agreement, and we defined indicating measurable indicators, and we'll come back after a year and see how you did, and we'll decide if we want to renew your grant. None of this is happening with this kind of support. Our office is literally buying hotel rooms. They're calling a hotel and they're saying, New Israel Fund is paying for 70 rooms or for 20 rooms for 2 weeks. And we're doing that, and that is simply crazy. Same goes with food, and Yasmin mentioned the shared centers where food is being sent out to Bedouin community in the Negev, packed and organized by Jews and Arabs together, and to the more underprivileged communities in the South in general. And I will say that when we offer our humanitarian support, we're interested in looking at the overlooked, in supporting Israel's most vulnerable communities. Because if you heard us already in our first 2 remarks, you can see a difference in the way different communities are experiencing this crisis. And if you come from a lower vantage point to begin with, then this crisis is hitting you harder. And if you live on a kibbutz, does everybody know what a kibbutz is? Yeah, in Israel, a small town, shared living, very organized. If you're living on a kibbutz, you are better organized to respond to this situation because your community is a community. It lives together. It's evacuated into a hotel together. Your teachers are with you. Your psychologists are with you. Your head of the community is with you. Your doctors are with you, because it's like one small town getting up and leaving together. And if you live in Israel's most weakest towns in the south of Israel, Yasmin mentioned some of them, you have not been told in a clear way if you need to leave your home. You have not been told in a clear way who is paying for your hotel room. You are in a different place than your neighbors. Your school is dispersed. You are not in an organized mode. This is the time to speak of the importance of a community. If you are part of a community, whether it's a synagogue or a kibbutz, you have a network. If you are just a person from what we used to call a development town down south in Israel, you are lost. We're interested in responding to the humanitarian needs of specifically the unrecognized villages, the Bedouin community in the Negev, the residents of the poorest neighborhood, the poorest Jewish towns of the South. This is where we'd be much rather paying for a hotel room than someone who has access to organized assistance. This is only response number one. I will rush through the other three responses. Yasmin can speak to them better than I can. The other is our concern for shared Jewish-Arab living, especially in mixed cities where Jews and Arabs live together, or in areas like the medical system, or public transportation, or many other places in Israel where Jews and Arabs interact, where Arabs are concerned to leave their house, especially if they dress very Arab. It could be concerning to speak Arabic on the bus, same way as it's concerning for me to speak Hebrew in Europe at this time, or differently, but similarly. And we're very interested in responding and organizing organizations that have been dealing with the shared society struggle for decades to think about what the response that is needed right now, because we want to strengthen solidarity and support de-escalation. It could be lit, it's just waiting for the match to light this very, very tense situation between Jews and Arabs within Israel, Palestinians living in Israel. So that's piece number 2 of our work. Piece number 3, Yasmin referred to and can say more, has to do with the human rights work, the infringement on freedom of speech and freedom of protest, especially anybody who's identified with suffering of innocent people in Gaza, that the Israeli ear is not open to hearing this now, and they end up in a police station, and other things that have to do with the erosion of human rights under the fog of war. And the last piece that maybe we can come back to if you want, Maya, sounds kind of crazy to invest in the middle of the crisis, but we have started looking at supporting organizations that are thinking about the day after. And what kind of Israel do we want to be when we're out of this? I don't know what it looked like when we're out of this, but are we thinking of a more peaceful future for the Gaza Strip that would mean a more peaceful future for Israel? Are we thinking of question of equality and equity for Israeli society now that we see the gaps showing up so clearly? And NIF has started investing money not only in hotel rooms, in shared society initiatives, and in legal and human rights support, but also in future thinking, vision building work, which is very much necessary and will only become more necessary.
Thank you so much for this very comprehensive overview. Yasmin, would you like to add to that?
I will just maybe expand a little bit about what we do in the South. Shira spoke very eloquently about everything, all the initiatives that NIF is doing. I just want to maybe paint you a more elaborate picture, specifically on the Bedouin community. So the Bedouin community is comprising about 1/3 of the Negev, the southern part of Israel, over 300,000 people. And about 1/3 of them live in what we call unrecognized villages. Unrecognized villages are villages that the government does not recognize as, formal towns. This is because an ongoing historic dispute about who owns the land, and we won't get into the politics of it. But what you need to know, what you should know, is that the unrecognized villages, being unrecognized, it means that they do not have the formal infrastructure that any town has or any village has. So they don't have electricity, no running water, no sewage systems, no roads, obviously no bomb shelters, and many of them don't have any clinics or access to healthcare. And speaking about the war, they are being considered as open spaces. And why is this important? Because part of the protection system of Israel, and specifically Israeli army, is the Iron Dome. Iron Dome is it's an integral part of Israel protection system, and it's basically it shoots down missiles and rockets coming from Gaza. And this is the problem that goes through the entirety of all of the past military operations that happened in Gaza, is that the Iron Dome covers only populated areas, and basically more than 100,000 people, all of which are Bedouins, are not covered or are not protected by Iron Dome. So all of these things were existing before we entered the war, and it's very important to say, Shira said it before, but when you have social gaps and you have gaps between societies, they surface or they get more extreme in emergency situations. So we saw that during COVID, and we see it now even in even their more extreme ways. So we see it not only in protection by Iron Dome, and then missiles fall on houses of people because they have no bomb shelters, and they are being considered as open spaces, and even being announced in the media as falls in open spaces, not in homes of people. We also see problems in the education system because all of the Bedouin schools are now closed, and almost, I think, more than 10 clinics are closed because they have no bomb shelters. And so the gaps in access to good education, access to healthcare, become even more pronounced now in this emergency. Putting even more than that, the Bedouin communities were not evacuated, obviously not to a hotel. They were not evacuated at all. So this is part of the gaps that we see. So what we are doing in the south is that we have several situation rooms. The main one is in Hura. Hura is a small Bedouin village, recognized village. And we work on a few issues. So first, we give humanitarian aid. So food, drugs, diapers, food for babies, stuff like that. And the most immediate things that people need, because many of the supermarkets or the places where people can buy food or can get food are closed. A lot of the food that comes to the Negev actually is based on agriculture from the area surrounding Gaza that is now closed, and people are not working there. So we have a problem with food. So this is part of our immediate humanitarian aid that we give. Second thing is that we work a lot about access to healthcare. So, for example, one of the main things that I worked on in the situation room was to make sure that the clinics that were closed will get the protection that they need, and we brought bomb shelters together with NIF, together with the situation room and with the Israeli army to specific clinics in the unrecognized villages, and we also worked with the military to make sure that the Iron Dome will cover these areas as populated spaces. We call it's a historic day because finally the Israeli government recognized these villages. So that's actually a good thing that happened during this war. But by now, more than 300 bomb shelters were put in place in the unrecognized villages. Shira, you want to use the picture? Should I show it, or? I can't hear you because it's on mute, so I don't know. Okay, so I just want to make to just so you'll understand. When we started talking about bomb shelters for over 100,000 people who are living in the desert with no bomb shelters, the answer that we were given by the military is that they will put these kind of bomb shelters. Okay, so this is sand, as you can see. And there's no roof. And this makes no sense because, rockets come from the sky. But this was the answer that we were given. And obviously this was not something that we can consider. And now what we put in place is either, formal bomb shelters. And this is one of the things that we insist on specifically in establishments like clinics and schools. And the other alternative is kind of concrete cylinders, kind of huge concrete pipes that people can run into, and these are things that we put next to homes or tents of people who live in this area, which it's not perfect, but at least they feel more safe now. And as I said, more than 300 bomb shelters were put in place by now in the past month. I would say two more things that we're doing in the situation room. One is that we provide, together with Adala, who's another grantee of NIF, we provide legal consult in advices and support to people who were fired from their work or were arrested because of posts in social media. Most of them do not get charged in their day in court because there's no, it has no basis. So only, I think, by now we have 172 files on records of people who were fired or arrested. Only maybe a dozen have actual charges being held against them. So this is another thing that is, I don't know whether to consider it as a success or not, because it just to me tells the story about how problematic the situation is today. But at least we give the support. And the fifth thing that we're doing is that we're lobbying to bring the hostages back home. And in the 240 hostages, there are a few who are Bedouins, and again, many don't talk about them. Some of the efforts that are being done now, like the international efforts, are specifically on on people who have other nationalities, because then you can have some kind of international pressure of other governments pressuring Hamas to let them go. And when we talk about the Palestinian citizens of Israel and the Bedouins, they do not have other nationalities, so they don't have this leverage. Hopefully we will bring all of them home. I think they should all be back home immediately, and it doesn't really matter what kind of passport you have. So this is also part of what we're doing, and NIF is funding heavily the headquarters for the hostages, and also the Bedouin branch in the south.
Yeah, thank you so much, and I can only echo what you said about hoping that all the hostages will very soon be back. I have many more questions, but I'm mindful of our time, so I do want to open up to the floor here in the room. If you want to say something, please raise your hand. Please keep in mind that you have to speak loudly and clearly, and please try to keep your questions short. Exactly, and maybe we'll collect 2 or 3 questions before we get to the answers. So there's a very quick hand there.
Without a microphone?
I think so, right? Okay, just have to speak up.
Okay, my name is Joel, and I have the following question. I heard from my cousin who lives in Israel that there are debates, especially amongst the ultra-Orthodox Jews who are a huge support factor for the Netanyahu government in Israel, that there are plans for the northern part of Gaza to be added to the Israeli territory. First of all, could you comment on that sentiment in Israel and what that potentially would mean for the future?
Thank you. For the people in the live stream, I'll also repeat the questions again so you can all hear it. Is there another question at this moment? Michael, please.
Yes, I just wanted to ask, you mentioned that the Israeli public has no ears at the moment for the issue of the war in Gaza. My understanding is that the only criticism of the war in Gaza at the moment comes from the families of the hostages who are frightened for their relatives or whatever. The only criticism one hears, let's say. Is there any movement or public discourse about how the war is actually being carried out?
Thank you very much. So I'll just repeat that for the people in front of the screens, or maybe further back in the room. First of all, there are debates among people in Israel who call for the resettlement of the northern part of the Gaza Strip. So for building up settlements again? What would this mean? And secondly, since Shira mentioned that the Israeli public right now has no ears for the suffering of civilians in Gaza, is the criticism of the military operation and how it is conducted is coming mainly from the families of the hostages? Or is there any other movement that's speaking up against this? How is this being discussed? Who wants to take the question?
Patrick?
Yeah, you can start if you want. Okay, so I can. I'll say there's a lot of conversations about reoccupying Gaza, because many people talk about the day after and how, okay, we want to crush Hamas. This is something that we hear a lot in the Israeli media. Demolish the terrorist organization, okay, but what will happen next? No one knows what will happen next. Like the government, nor the Israeli media are willing to actually have a real and sincere and painful discourse about this. So we hear many people talking about, bringing back the settlements and reoccupying Gaza. This is to me, this is the actual existential threat, both to the state of Israel and to the Palestinians. And we do hear some people talk about, at least in our circles, but again, as Shira mentioned, we are anarchists and extreme left-wing people. So we're talking about this and about this for decades already, about how we should finally solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I think this is what is important to say about this thing, is that at least what is happening now in the Israeli public is that we understand now that the conception of Netanyahu's government, and not only this government, but his previous governments in the past 15 years, talking about a policy of managing the conflict and living between one escalation to the other is not working anymore. And the fact that we have a discourse about the day after is, to me, something that is extremely important, because now we hear heads of Shin Bet, of the Israeli military, people who were ministers of defense, saying the withdrawal from Gaza was an important part, and we cannot go back there, and we have to solve the conflict, and we cannot manage it anymore. So these are new winds and new opinions that have finally been said by mainstream figures on Israeli media. So this is extremely important for me. I think this is an opportunity, and we should hold on and take advantage of this opportunity, because I know that the others who talk about reoccupying Gaza are also seeing this event as an opportunity, and we cannot let this happen. There's also talks about taking all the 2 million people, Gazans, and kicking them out of the Gaza Strip into Egypt. There's actually a formal document that went out of the Minister of Information and Intelligence about this. So this is to me, this is really this is both an opportunity, but also an existential threat, and we cannot let this happen. We will see the occupation of Gaza will be exactly as the occupation of the West Bank, and it will just be another form of apartheid. For the second question about criticism on the war. So I think the problem in the public discourse, first, there are two things that you should know. That first, Israelis have no idea what's going on in Gaza. So the Israeli media is very well aware and concerned about what it shows, and they do not show anything about what happens in Gaza, only, let's say, very detached footages of buildings fall down, So you don't see faces of people. You don't hear stories of people. We hear emotional stories of what happens in Israel, but we have no idea what happens in Gaza. Who does know? Palestinian citizens of Israel, so people who speak Arabic, okay, not only Palestinians, also Jews who speak Arabic and are familiar with media in Arabic, or just watch CNN or BBC or foreign media channels. They know what happened, and you guys, okay, so the people or Jewish people or people from outside of Israel. And when you talk to someone who's being exposed through the media or through other channels to what is happening in Gaza, everyone understands the crisis. But the Israeli community is being shut down. Like they have no idea, and it's not necessarily their choice. And I think this is part of the reason why there's almost no criticism about what is happening. And most of the criticism is against the dysfunctional government and the fact that it is being dysfunctional regarding the way they work towards Israeli citizens, but not necessarily what happens in Gaza. And the second thing is that there's this constant saying within Israeli society or the media is that this is not the time. Now it's the time for war. Now we fight. Later we will think how to criticize ourselves. But this is not the time for criticism. And as Shira mentioned before, you should remember that this happens after more than a decade of Netanyahu being a prime minister and of destroying the public sphere, and most of the government officials are people who are really are not really people who can actually criticize, and this we have this culture now of a problem to criticize. So to me personally, I know that NIF is doing it, but I want to talk about me personally and not NIF. I want to say that I understood during this month that it is my obligation to criticize the Israeli military and what they are doing in Gaza. And I, even though I'm afraid for my job as a physician and other things that I'm doing, I understand that it is now or never. I have to speak up. And I know that many others are doing the same, but it is not enough. I think the problem is basically because just Israeli public don't know enough about what is happening in Gaza.
Shira, what do you have to add or respond?
So Yasmin is always so deep and truthful. So I really will garnish it only by a little bit. I must agree that it's not like the occupation was going so well for us in the West Bank that we want to redo it in Gaza. Anybody with any little hope to a future of us not living on our sword in our region cannot consider any situation of going back and creating settlements, Jewish settlements within Gaza, that even just from a Jewish perspective, what they would do is would take more Jewish life and more military protection. So, I mean, that's not even, shouldn't be worthwhile. And that any viable solution for the Gaza Strip and for our region and this country has seen a situation where I'll try to say it in a delicate way. There was a need to part ways with a local government that was elected by the people and was severely hurting lives of people under its own ruling. And it needed an international, years-long effort to part ways and eliminate that government, and for the entire free world to help in establishing a new government and a new future. I think I am not a government official. My understanding in these areas are very little. You heard that my degree is in social anthropology. I have nothing to offer to the people who are conducting the thinking and the future peace building work. Only my work as a fundraiser and as a philanthropist to give them our support so that they can think of what is the international solution, what is the solution that brings the PA, the Palestinian Authority, back into Gaza, anything that is viable and can end Hamas ruling and building new settlements anywhere in Gaza. I don't care if it's like the north of the Gaza Strip, or what we're seeing now, our soldiers are coming in and planting trees in Gaza in memory of old settlements that were there and in hope of rebuilding them, cannot be good for Gaza and cannot be good for Israel. And only one comment, Joel, you said your name was Joel. Only one comment about something you mentioned. You mentioned that the people who are interested in this are the ultra-Orthodox. I don't think that's accurate. I will say the ultra-Orthodox, and that's very interesting. If someone wants to discuss it, we can discuss it separately. The ultra-Orthodox community in Israel is in a very challenging place right now with the social contract between us and who is shedding blood and who is not shedding blood, which is not something I would like to measure citizenship by or contribution by. But for many years, there's been legal dispute whether they serve in the army or they don't serve in the army. And at a moment like this, it has become especially complex and painful between the ultra-Orthodox community and the rest of us. And that's another question of a social contract order that Israel would need to look into. The people who are pushing for this kind of resettlement are the nationalistic Orthodox, if you want to get into splitting hairs between different kinds of communities that have a very strong partnership with this current government, and therefore feel like they can design Israel along these scary lines. And to answer Michael's question regarding voices against the war, Yasmin was very merciful in her analysis and in saying most Israelis are just not aware of the severity of the price that's being paid by civilians in Gaza. I will add to this that it's very hard for Israelis to think of the term civilians in Gaza. Is there such a thing, civilians in Gaza? Is Gaza comprised of innocent people at all? That's a thought that is challenging today for Israelis. Many people perceive the entire 2 million people who are living there as terrorists. Doesn't matter how old they are or how much they're suffering themselves from Hamas presence for years and of late. And so I honor Yasmin's answer in saying people are not aware. That's very generous of you to say, my friend. So it's true, it's an awareness problem, it's a narrative issue, it's fear. Fear has been conducting relations between Jews and Arabs for many years and has been fed and fostered. And from a place of fear, you have less solidarity because you're afraid. And I also want to add something which is maybe unique more. Well, no, it's actually also in the Bedouin community. Every home has someone serving in the army right now. We are extremely concerned for our children, and people prioritize and think of their own children. And I can't tell you how many kids I know, they're not kids, they're soldiers, who are literally inside Gaza right now, and we haven't heard from them in days because their phones get taken, and a lot of the sensitivity and concern and worry goes to our boys and girls who are in huge threat because war is a bad thing for children and all living things. And And because everybody's thinking of their own child or their nephew and space in your heart is limited. And with everything else that was mentioned, I was just going to answer your question with the answer no. I cannot recall hearing any opposition, clear, current opposition to the war, except from Arabs, Palestinians in Israel, who put themselves in danger if they say it, and the families of the hostages who are understandably allowed to say it. And if anybody outside Israel would say it, they would be blamed for being anti-Israel. So the public, it can't be said, it can't be heard. It's not on the table. You don't hear, the opposition in the Knesset is not saying it. I have not seen it in the news. Very weak voices calling for a ceasefire.
But also, I want to mention that also the families of the people who were murdered are against the war, which is, I think, the most amazing thing. And because many of the people who were murdered were peace activists and were people who, like Vivian, took people from Gaza to get treatment in hospitals in Tel Aviv, for example. And they were saying for years and for decades that there should be peace between Israelis and Palestinians. Otherwise, such a thing like we've seen in October 7th will happen, and they were right. And they are also saying that this war should stop. So it was important for me to mention them also.
Thanks so much. Let's take another round of questions. I'm keeping an eye on the watch. We're almost at 8:30. Yasmin, do you have like 5 to 10 more minutes? Okay, great. So are there more questions in the room?
Yes, you mentioned in the beginning that you will also give us a perspective on the discussions of the future. So that would be interesting.
So I don't know what's happening in the discussion rooms. I do know that my camp, our camp, has had a problem for many years. We have become very good in saying what we think is wrong with the Netanyahu policies or the right-wing policies at large, and we have not been as clever in providing an alternative. And maybe it's understandable. Maybe we can, we're not, whatever. That's the reality, is that we've been spending many years in saying, this is wrong, this is not equal, this is not democratic, but what is it that we are suggesting? And to be naive and to say, well, none of the people in Gaza are interested in harming Israel is naive, and we saw that it's naive. And a country needs to be able to protect itself, but we do need some sort of a security theory and a security policy that is compatible to our progressive, liberal, democratic values. We can't just say we'll hope to be Switzerland and survive in the Middle East. So I cannot tell you the details of the policy, but I can tell you that we will be heavily funding now think tanks that have the knowledge of the region. Which countries can be our partners? How do you go about constructing a civilian government, a government that will answer to the needs of the population in Gaza? What do you do with refugees? Egypt is not interested. Jordan is not interested. Israel is not interested. What do you do with them? All these questions have to be answered from a pro-democratic, progressive, liberal perspective, and have not been addressed that way. And we don't want to wait for the day where after a future election, and we may have a better government, and then we may look for ideas and start writing them down. We want them to be written and ready. even at the level of language for bills that can be presented in the Knesset, both for internal work in Israel and for our work with our neighbors. So this process is only at its first steps. We have only identified the partners that we want to work with, some progressive Israeli think tanks, and the kind of funding that we want to invest. And we'll see the fruits, hopefully within the next few months. But just to say, we're taking money away from hotel rooms into vision building was a leap for us at this moment, and we decided to do it.
Thank you. Yasmin, do you have anything to add about
Yeah. Shortly, I will say that and I know that I'm not alone in this, I keep thinking about Yom Kippur War, so the war in 1973, and that Shira mentioned before. So the war in 1973 started on October 6, 1973, exactly 50 years before our October 7th. And it was a war against a huge enemy, the Egyptian army. It was a surprise against the Israeli military and the Israeli society. Really heartbreaking trauma to the Israeli society, and that was after a few other wars against the Egyptians. So the conflict was fierce, and however, it ended with an agreement to have a long-term agreement. 2 years after the war, we had an interim agreement with the Egyptians, and 5 years later, five and a half years later, Israel and Egypt signed a peace agreement, and this peace agreement is being held until today. And the border with Egypt is the most peaceful border we have. The second peaceful border that we have is with Jordan. And I think that this is proof for anyone who thinks that the best defense comes by attacking other people, by military force, that the best defense is achieved by peace agreements, by long-term peace agreements. And now the people who help the Israelis in negotiations in order to bring the hostages back home are the Egyptians. So I think these are things that now we should, put more emphasis on, speak more about when we talk to the Israelis and Palestinians. And I think the proximity in the dates between Yom Kippur and what we have now is extremely important to make these comparisons, so people can see with their own eyes that there is an alternative. I think part of the problem is that nor the Israeli side, neither the Palestinian side can actually envision another reality. But we can see it. We see it in the Egyptian border and in the Jordanian border, and this is how I see the future.
Closing remark. To continue, it's like we planned this. I have been obsessed with reading about 1974 in the past month and a bit, and I wasn't born when the Yom Kippur War happened. I was born 2 years later. My honorable parents are in the room with me, and I told them not to embarrass me, but I'm going to embarrass them. And they were young adults at the time, and my father was recruited back to the army, if you know your Jewish calendar, correct me if I'm wrong, on Yom Kippur, and came back home on Purim. Right? Months later. So every time I worry about our boys, not my boys, but our boys who are in the army, and I think that they may have to stay there until March, that is very scary. But I also read about things that developed in 1974 and in 1975, the year I was born. And the fact that Anwar Sadat was in Jerusalem by the end of that decade, And I was a toddler, and my parents can attest to the fact that because my mother is a doctor and Sadat was wearing earphones for translation, I thought he was also a doctor and he was coming to heal our government or something. And this is a similar, I think, I didn't live at the time, but this is a similar trauma in the level that hit us. And I joined my friend Yasmin in hoping that by the end of this decade, and things happen faster at this day and age, right? So maybe sooner we will see the next generation of Anwar Sadat visiting us in the next generation to fill up our Knesset and our leadership, because we have, both people deserve that kind of leadership and not the one that we have right now. And that is what I will do as a Israeli, and I will do as a member of the New Israel Fund, and that is what we hope for together. Thank you.
Yasmin, did you want to add anything, just because you didn't have the chance for a formal closing remark?
I think we close so, with such an optimistic tone. I don't want to to ruin it.
Myself, but my friend told me this week that our work is work of hope and responsibility. So I don't know if we're optimistic, but we have hope and responsibility.
Yes,
Thanks.
exactly.
Thank you, Yasmin. Well, first of all, I think I can speak for all of us in thanking you wholeheartedly both for sharing both personal insights and perspectives from your work. I also want to add that whenever people ask me here about, but I can't see a way forward, they tell me I can't see a future, or there's a lot of talk right now in Germany about how different communities, diasporic, but not only, can live together here, and that it's become impossible. I tell them, I'm looking to my colleagues in Israel and I see the work they're doing there, and it's difficult, it's painful, it's sometimes very complicated conversation you're having to have. But if these people who are coming from different work together, if they are investing in Jewish-Arab partnership and in a way forward, then who are we sitting in Berlin to say that it can't be done, right? And so I really appreciate you taking the time. Thanks again to Bildungswerk Berlin for making all of this possible. And finally, please do stay in touch, all of you, whether you're in the room or in front of the screens. Please follow us on various social media, sign up for our newsletter, etc. We want to bring more voices like Shira's and Yasmin's to Berlin, and hopefully Yasmin will also be able to come visit us in Berlin at some point. I'll keep asking her about it. And thanks again so much for coming. And I don't know if you have anything else to add before we close out.
No, thank you. I will thank you all of you that we had this very interesting and hope-giving talk in a way. So thank you very much.
Thank you.